In 1969, the National Association for Fat Acceptance was created. Their mission was to advance social acceptance not only for fat people, but also for people who had a strong attraction to fat bodies. And every year, the organization held a convention for all its fat members, along with the fat admirers, to get together and socialize. These conventions are still going on to this day. But what went on at these conventions 30 to 40 years ago is pretty hard to figure out, considering the lack of cameras and video recordings in the time period. But recently, I came across a first-hand recounting from a journalist who attended one of these NAAFA conventions in 1996, and her perspective is fascinating. Her story sheds light on what kinds of socializing went on at these fat-positive conventions, the demographics of the people that attended them, and what fat acceptance was really like in 1996. So let's see. Today, I'm going to read an article about a first-hand account of a NAAFA convention in 1996. Now, before you click off because hearing about a convention from 30 years ago sounds really boring, I'll let you know it's a really interesting story. For some background information, NAAFA is the National Association for the Advancement of Fat Acceptance, and it was created not just to aid progress for the acceptance of fatness, but also for the normalization and acceptance of being attracted to fat people. This means that the organization's leadership and membership were also full of people who were not fat, but had a strong sexual attraction to fat people. But while doing research on that topic, I came across this article and I really wanted to share it. I'm going to read most of it, but there are a few points that I don't think are interesting or that I will rephrase because YouTube probably won't like what was actually written. But feel free to go read the full article after the video. Also, there are some size references in this video that seem very different from modern sizes, so be aware of that. A size 20 in the story might be closer to a modern-day size 12. I think, what's wrong with this freak? Again and again, Hertz has been smitten with men who like willowy gamines. Her latest crush was a man whose physical ideal was Elle Macpherson. I, she says wryly, am the anti-Elle. Membership in this community is overwhelmingly middle class, white, and female. There are a few African Americans because, as one member told me, being fat is less of a stigma in their community. Neither are there many fat men. The members are mostly regular-sized men who are attracted to fat women, because societal standards of slimness are not nearly as severe on men as women. But members are quick to point out that discrimination is dependent not only on fat, but on body type. Men whose weight is distributed in a typically female pattern around the thighs and buttocks have more of a problem than guys with the apple-shaped Harley biker look, big shoulders and stomach, small butt and legs. The more time I spend at the convention, the more I realize that the fat activist movement is going through a political puberty. For example, supersize women, those women 300 pounds and above, think, quote, mid-sized women don't really understand what discrimination is about. On the other hand, in this world where bigger really is better, mid-sizers are envious of the sexual appeal of the supersizers. Many straight women resent the presence of lesbians at the meeting, claiming lesbians don't understand their, quote, issues. Nobody's quite sure whether the enemy is the health establishment, the legions of doctors, dietitians, and fitness gurus who make their money trying to cure fatness, or the judicial system, which can't seem to make up its mind whether morbid obesity, defined medically as a weight 100% in excess of one's ideal body weight, is covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Of course, within the ranks of the activists, nobody can agree whether fat ought to be legally declared a handicap. Such a ruling could win some job discrimination suits, but it also might further marginalize fat people, most of whom want nothing more than to be considered normal. Tolerance for people's differences is a prevailing theme in the size acceptance movement, but as I discovered, that tolerance doesn't extend to mildly pudgy journalists. I was, not to put a fine-tooth point on it, shunned. Shortly after I arrived, even though I had informed officials that I was writing a story, the organizer ordered me to leave the convention and tried to rip the notes out of my hands. In a seminar, every seat was filled except the one next to mine. I literally could not get the time of day. I asked a guy with a watch what time it was, and he said pointedly, "I don't know," and then walked away. It was like reliving my worst days of junior high. But as Jameson, one of the few members who would talk to me, explained, as a fat woman, you spend so much of your time having to be nice and polite, having to sort of apologize for taking up so much space, that when you get here, you can be yourself. And for a lot of people, being themselves means being angry sometimes at the status quo, which is you. Then she showed me the skimpy bathing suit she had bought for the evening's pool party, plus some lingerie she was going to surprise her husband with that night. Jameson was not an angry woman. Haley Hertz is talking about yo-yo dieting, the pattern of loss and gain that has plagued the life of virtually every fat person. Hertz was a chubby baby and an even chubbier child. She recalls a horrible trip to Southeast Asia where everyone wanted to touch me because they couldn't believe how large I was. Hertz has been thin several times, but she always felt like she was renting a thin body and could be evicted at any moment. I've lost 150 pounds a clip. I can do it. It's easy. But then, when I reach that magic number, it's like I'm a thin person with the same problems, because people who used to hate me now like me. And what's all that about? Here's what fat activists want. First, the death of dieting and the complete acceptance of one's weight. Then, armless chairs in movies, restaurants, and doctors' waiting rooms. The ability to go to a physician and not be scolded or insulted. Members say the reason fat people are considered so unhealthy is that, rather than being lectured by a doctor about dieting, they'll wait until the ailment is so bad that they simply have to go. A skeptical view of obesity cures, like the new appetite suppressant, fenfluramine, which creates false hope among those who have not yet accepted their size. Affordable medical insurance, or any medical insurance. It's almost impossible to get if you're 100 pounds overweight and self-employed. And protection against job discrimination. Like most organizations in which political activism provides a thinly veiled excuse for mating rituals, NAAFA was rife with perky, upbeat activities, fashion shows, sexuality workshops, pool parties. But the issue that subtly informed all the others was health, namely, the bold assertion that dieting is a sucker's game, and it's perfectly possible to be fit and fat. Fat activists' main argument is that it's dieting, not obesity, that kills you. They point to famous fatties like John Candy, Jerry Garcia, and 1,000-plus pound Walter Hudson, who activists say all died when they started to eat normally once again after going off a starvation diet. The body lost lean muscle mass, the argument goes, so when they started to regain weight after their period of starvation, undue stress was placed on their heart. Sherry Collins Eckert, for one, agrees. Colin Eckert, whose lovely, melancholy features and luminous skin are reminiscent of a maidservant in a Rembrandt painting, claims that she's dieted her way to her current size. I don't dare ask her weight, but her dress size is about a 60. Leaning heavily on her cane, she explains that her current mobility problems are not due so much to her weight as they are to the pain from her stomach stapling surgery. In the late 1970s, she had a vertical gastroplasty, in which her stomach was sutured to about the size of an egg, allowing her to eat only 2 ounces of food at a time. In 4 months, she lost 133 pounds. Despite the vomit, diarrhea, and blackout spells, she was thrilled. After 2 years, the weight began to pile on again. My body became so good at conserving calories. My doctor told me I couldn't eat more than 500 calories a day without gaining, she says. Excessive scarring caused painful internal adhesions, and many fibrous foods became lodged in the shrunken openings in her stomach. Today, Colin Eckert lives on pain medication, but insurance will not pay for reversing the procedure, and doctors are afraid to operate anyway because of her weight. The only time I'm completely comfortable is when I'm in a hot tub, she says. Certainly, there's a level of denial underlying this tale. Colin Eckert's supersize has as much to do with her discomfort as the effects of her surgery, and this is an aspect of fat activism that is baffling, if not downright alarming, to an outsider. The placid acceptance of a myriad of health problems that might be preventable not by conforming to the aesthetics of conventional society, but by, say, weighing a mere 300 pounds instead of 400 or 500. And you want to know what's the most ironic of all of the health problems? Many of these women whose bodies fit certain preconceived notions of bountiful fertility cannot conceive. Hormonal disturbances have wreaked havoc on their menstrual cycles. Members who dissent from the prevailing opinion don't dare voice their feelings to the other members. I don't want to be told I should diet any more than I want to be told that I must diet, says Anne, a proofreader from Boston who walks around in fuzzy slippers shaped like cows because her feet are so swollen that she can't find shoes that are comfortable. At this point, I'm losing mobility. How can I let this happen? She says. Back in my hotel room, I flip through a copy of the Dimensions magazine, the magazine where Big is Beautiful. It is published by the NAAFA chairman, Conrad Blinkensdorf, and it's for fat women and their male admirers. I get a call from David Gaff, an associate professor at the University of Mississippi, and himself an admirer of large female forms. He's just published his first novel, which oddly enough is about a professor of a southern university who is obsessed with fat women. Anyway, Gelf gives me the skinny on fat admirers. The majority of these guys want to be thought of as average Joes who associate fat with ultra-femininity. For many of them, that's true, but what many others won't tell you is that there's sometimes an element of sadomasochism in their interest. I asked Gelf about the line that crops up repeatedly in the Dimensions personal ads. Encouragers welcome, or no encouragers please. What is an encourager? That's a guy whose ultimate fantasy is to be with a woman who's so large that she's virtually immobilized. It is Saturday night, the evening of the convention's costume ball. Tonight, Haley Hertz is thrilled. She's actually bought, not yet worn, but bought a bathing suit. It's the first one she's owned since she was a child. We sit through dance after dance. Me, because nobody is giving me second looks, and Hertz, because she's too embarrassed to flirt back with the several men I see eyeing her. Motown gets everyone on their feet. Respect, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and Earth Angel. Many of these women are supremely graceful, living boleros, whirling around the tacky hotel ballroom. Earth Angels, indeed. See the baked potato? Asks Hertz, pointing to a woman who did in fact look like she was wrapped in aluminum foil. She was slow dancing with a somber, all too visibly aroused young man. She's had 6 guys this weekend, Hertz tells me. That's what's happening with a lot of women here. They don't have an adolescence, so they come to these meetings and all that repressed energy comes out. Inside every fat person is a volcano waiting to erupt. And the men at the ball, the fat admirers, just stand back and wait for the lava to flow. It was getting late. Prizes for the best costume of the evening were given out. First prize went to a woman who was easily 5 feet in diameter. She was dressed as a pizza, and the sobriquet above the sewn-on anchovies read, "I deliver." It was time for me to go. I turned around to say goodbye to Hertz, and I saw a tall, well-built man swiftly making his way to her table. She put her head down and tried to will the earth to swallow her up. She wasn't ready. But in a moment, a group of men and women swirled around her, urging her to her feet, imploring her to join them. No way. She couldn't dance. She had never danced. I couldn't hear the conversation, but the last I saw Hertz was a tiny, plump hand being dragged, only half reluctantly, to the dance floor. I found almost every part of this story interesting. The people the journalist spoke to, the recounting of what happened at the convention, the University of Mississippi professor explaining what fat admiration is, the fact that a grown woman was referred to as a baked potato. The whole thing was amazing. And I'm glad the journalist ended up finding people to speak to at the event, but it's crazy that people were ostracizing her and even trying to kick her out for being too skinny. And that type of behavior of being angry at skinny people for basically existing is shockingly similar to the modern day fat acceptance movement. And if you've watched enough videos on my channel, you definitely know that that is true. And so is the mid-size versus supersize drama that was also referenced in the story of supersizers being angry at mid-sizers for being too small. And aside from that, the journalist also noted how there were very few Black women in attendance at the convention, which is really interesting considering the fat acceptance movement claims that the fat liberation movement was founded and mostly for fat Black women.
Let's talk about the body positive movement. The body positive movement originated in the 1960s when the fat acceptance movement was taking place, and it was created for marginalized bodies, plus-size people, people of color, specifically women of color.
So that's the whole way that body positivity, which started as a movement by Black fat people, has been co-opted by white thin women.
And yet, the convention had a disproportionately small amount of Black women. So if the movement was made for Black women that felt oppressed because of their size, then those women were either pushed out due to racism or other factors, or the movement wasn't actually created with Black women in mind. My guess is the latter. But I felt so many ups and downs while reading this story. On one hand, it seems like the attendees really did have fun and found some amount of community and catharsis from the experience, which is good. But the positive stories and experiences would immediately be followed up by something off-putting, like reading about the Dimensions magazine and the specific pandering to fat admirers at the convention, or the author talking about her experience of almost being shunned. The whole convention was a bunch of very large people being happy, socializing, and going to seminars about how being fat is not unhealthy and how it doesn't cause health problems, while being surrounded by people who are very clearly dealing with health issues related to their size. But even so, the people at the convention are so convinced that obesity doesn't cause any health issues to the point that people who do want to lose weight are afraid to even speak about it for fear of being ostracized or making people angry. But aside from this article, I also found this clip from a NAAFA convention from the mid-90s.
This conference is to have our members have a chance to get together annually.
And I'm all for people having items that help them in their everyday life, like canes or mobility devices or whatever. But it's strange that the people at this convention realized that so many people in their community have difficulty standing up that they made this device instead of thinking, hey, if so many of us are having issues with this basic task because of our size, maybe we should look into changing our size and becoming smaller so we won't need all of these small devices to help with simple daily tasks, like standing up. But instead of coming to that realization, they decided to double down on believing there are no health issues with being fat and created this type of device. But it was after I saw that NAAFA clip that I realized why this article was such an interesting read. It's because the entire convention sounds so dystopian. Almost like WALL-E, the movie. And if you haven't seen WALL-E, it's a Pixar movie where people live in space and have little to no autonomy because they're addicted to technology, and they ride around in these motorized scooters because they're too fat to walk, or they just don't want to walk. And similar to the device in that NAAFA clip, the people in the movie seem to have come to the realization that a lot of people were getting too fat to walk. But instead of thinking of a long-term solution to the problem that more and more people seem to be becoming fat enough that they can't walk, the people in Wall-E decided, let's just make scooters for everyone so we never have to walk again. And that seems very similar to the little stand-up device that they were showing at the convention. And the people in Wall-E think that the world they're living in is an exercise-free, food-abundant utopia. But from the outside, viewers like us can clearly see that the world is a dystopia. Just like how the women at the NAAFA convention see being fat as this amazing thing that has no adverse health effects, while any outsider can plainly see the real-life health outcomes of long-term obesity by just looking at the people at the convention. That clear disconnect between what people at the convention wholeheartedly seem to believe and the very obvious truth they seem to be purposefully ignoring makes the entire situation fascinating and pretty creepy. But anyway, I just wanted to share this story. I thought it was very interesting, and if you want to read the whole thing, I'll leave it in the description below. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next video.